right. Can you guys hear me? Excellent. Well, let me first start by saying that was a fact I didn't know, and I love it, and I've put it in the presentation hopefully for next year. I also want to start by saying, as Bambi mentioned, this is the third time that Vator has put on Splash down here in LA, and want to thank her and the entire Vator team. As we all know, for events like this, a ton of work goes on behind it, and it seems like every year it just gets bigger and better. And so, as Bambi said, just to kick things off, we thought we'd do a little mini State of the Union, just 4 or 5 minutes to provide a sense of what's happening. And many of us in this room are part of what's happening and feel it and know it, but it's interesting to look at a couple different areas. The first is, we'll take a look at the numbers, the quantitative essence of what we know is happening. And what's super exciting is the fact that if you look at the number of companies being launched, the number of companies being funded, and based on exits, in fact, the metrics are as high as they've ever been. The second and complementary point we'll take a little closer look at is this notion of, here in the Southland, there are clear power alleys that have emerged, and there are areas that shouldn't be surprising to you, but where so many of our entrepreneurs are leveraging the unique strengths across multiple industry verticals here. And lastly, this ecosystem that is developed, which is such a critical part of having a strong entrepreneurial bent, and that is supporting all of the companies that have been coming up, particularly in the last few years. So fast forwarding ahead to the forecasts, I'd say there's obviously some June gloom, and we're about to experience it here ourselves next month, but generally speaking, for the topic at hand, it's a more sunny skies ahead. So I thought I'd start with, in terms of the numbers, Built in LA, a group that was started in Chicago, is in a number of other tech cities, and recently had an event here, and I'm going to steal the numbers that they presented because they're so telling, I think. Tony Pritzker from the Pritzker family released these numbers recently, and as we mentioned, it's essentially been a record-setting year for digital tech companies in LA. If you look at, we've got, I think this is one of the best quotable data points, but every 40 hours a new company is launched in LA, 200 companies last year, and on the other end of the spectrum, in terms of exits, almost 50 companies were bought in Los Angeles last year. The next piece you look at really is the size and the breadth and the reach of where these companies have started and how they're getting funded. Almost $1 billion in funding and this is LA specifically last year. Certainly if you were to include Orange County, which some of you drove 2 hours, probably came from Orange County, maybe San Diego, the numbers would be significantly higher. But $900 million last year across 100 companies, which gives a sense of breadth, and actually 170 different institutional investment groups that participated, and we'll talk a little bit later about where all those dollars are coming from. The quote on the right here is from Techstars, actually the head of it in Seattle. Techstars is arguably one of the most successful accelerators in the nation, and I think what's important though is he's putting forward this notion of if you're a secondary market, meaning if you're not in Silicon Valley, anybody else, one of the things that's so important is you figure out your comparative advantage. And I think the stats on the bottom start to show the proof of our comparative advantages. Where did all these dollars go that were raised last year? Almost a quarter of them went to fashion apparel companies. And I'm sure many of you in the audience, that's the genre that you're playing in disintermediating the fashion world, creating new brands, online only. The other areas where most of the dollars went, digital media, gaming, and marketing. So that's a nice segue into this notion of power. Is LA in particular really good at? And obviously, the thing we all know is we're the indisputable capital of the global entertainment industry, and that plays itself out in digital media. A ton of video-related startups. In particular, we are poised to benefit from the online video boom. E-commerce, we're seeing right now the marriage of content and commerce. It includes fashion. companies like Beachmint, who you'll hear from the CEO later today, they created, at least in the online world and to the scale that they have, the subscription e-commerce business. And we obviously also are seeing celebrity endorsed properties, and we could spend all night talking about the ones that have popped up in the last few years and the new ones we'll see later this year and beyond. Gaming, which is really a adjunct, if you will, to the entertainment industry, although ironically per year than feature films. And you've got some of the major global players either based here, like Activision, or that have big offices here, like Electronic Arts, and now companies like Riot Games, who was sold to Tencent for almost $1 billion. The fourth area, not talked about quite as much sometimes, but direct marketing, advertising technologies. Google and Yahoo, the core technologies behind their ad engines came out of Overture, came out of Applied Semantics. LA has always been very good in the dark arts of acquisition, whether that was telesales or direct marketing or direct mail in the 90s, and now more recently defining ad technologies. Last but not least, clean tech. LA actually has a very strong, coming out of our defense industry and material sciences, we've got a big clean tech industry. Not talked about as much these days, but important. So here's sort of this tsunami of success. Enjoy the eye candy of logos up here. Some sunk since last year and used to be on this are no longer. Other ones have risen to the top of the wave as well. But I think what's important to notice is there's just, there's not a slide big enough right now that can handle all the logos of the companies that have been growing. I even looked at, I think Demand Media just had their first $100 million quarter. And Cornerstone On Demand, which doesn't fit into my 4 prior categories. They're basically HR software, super sexy. A massive, multi-billion-dollar IPO last year. It's also worth noting, well, who are the major tech companies not based here but have opened up, set up shops on our shores? And as you wouldn't surprise you, Netflix has a big office in Beverly Hills, YouTube, amazing campus in the South Bay, Google spread throughout but have a big campus in Venice Beach, EA and Playa del Rey, Microsoft downtown, Yahoo in Santa Monica, Palantir, yet to be announced, but they're a pretty secretive company, so I'm sure it'll be big. And then I took advantage of the opportunity to put Yahoo, in case that happens, and yet Tumblr as well. So, this is the slide where if I was showing it 2 years ago, we'd see a couple of dots. And I think if we show it 2 years from now, you'll barely be able to see the outline of LA, right? This is a infographic from a group called Represent LA, showing each dot represents another startup, another accelerator, incubator, co-working space, investors. And as you can see, there's obviously some clustering around the west side and Hollywood as well. But it's just pretty amazing to watch and the net gains that are happening. So back to that question of where are all these dollars coming from that are funding companies in the region. Usually I break it apart into 2 different buckets. We sort of have the native locals, and those are the logos here on the left. So you've got some long-standing firms who've been in the area 10, 20 years, guys like Rustic Canyon, Graycroft, GRP, and I won't go through all the different names. And then some new firms, or firms that are new to us in terms of actually establishing a presence here, like lowercase capital. And then you have the most active out-of-towners who obviously are writing significant checks as well. Scale Venture Partners, and I think you're going to hear from them after me. Light Bank, based out of Chicago, but investors in Beachmint as well, and a whole host in Javelin, who's also a sponsor here, a whole host of other names. You also have the talent agencies getting into the mix. Actually, this afternoon, I was at WME trying to figure out, what are you guys doing? Because I see investments are happening. They're obviously bringing, in some cases, the celebrity talent. So WME is invested in a number of companies. UTA hooked up with Kleiner Perkins, well-known Bay Area venture capital firm, to do a accelerator at the USC campus. And CAA has been investing in companies as well, and also announced the intention to raise a venture capital fund on their own. So one more group bringing potential new dollars to early stage companies in the area. It's absolutely critical and sometimes too overlooked how important the ecosystem around, so it's not just the funding, it's not just the entrepreneurs, but it's the banks, it's the attorneys, It's the co-working spaces who are all a part of it. And you've got examples up here of law firms like Silicon Legal Strategy who have moved down from the Bay Area and opened an office. Cooley, who's come up from San Diego to open an office as well. And as sort of a leading or a trailing indicator, I can argue either way, but just seeing the growth in all these supporting services is also a reflection of what's happening. Last but not least, particularly the tech media and the tech events and groups, just this strength in the growth in news outlets. Now you've got reporters from Pando Daily who have moved down and live in LA. We've had the SoCal Tech News to be such a strong supporter of local news as well. Vator's covering a lot of LA now in part because of this presence here. And then, your inbox could be filled every morning with newsletters about local tech news, and your nights could be filled every night going to events like this, which is also a great sign. And we're trying to capture the next generation of rock stars out of the universities. So you've got programs sponsored by many of the local venture firms to grab those graduates and get them into our portfolio companies. And these are sort of formal programs that are popping up. So again, a lot of good things to talk about, and fundamentally strong activity. The economic backdrop, sort of the wind is at our back right now for the kind of companies that we're seeing launched here. And again, underscore the importance of the ecosystem. So it's a good time to be a Angelino entrepreneur. And last year we looked at the Silicon Beach moniker, which love it or hate it, it's here to stay. I think we got a new one though if you hate it, the Technollywood. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Bambi.